hands together and welcome Mike Kleen.
Thank you very much. I don't have a microphone, so I'm going to try to yell as loud as I can, but if anybody has any problems hearing me, feel free to speak up. I lived in Rockford here for a number of years, but really I've lived all over the state, which has sort of given me a really great look at all the different legends from all over the place, from western Illinois, southern Illinois, just every different part of the state. And so what I've been doing for the past several years is sort of looking at the history and folklore behind a lot of well-known and little-known local legends. So the first place we're going to talk about is the Emma Jones home. Now, Emma Jones was an immigrant from Norway. She lived at this home from the 1920s until the 1950s. So a fairly long time, but as we'll see, her influence sort of remained beyond her years. So Emma Jones's husband was a ship captain, and so he was off on business quite frequently. And so Emma Jones would often sit alone up in the top floor with her two dogs and look out over the Rock River to see her husband coming home from work. And after her husband passed, she lived there with her dogs, and her beloved dogs passed away as well. And so some people say that she began to slip into loneliness and dementia. And so her family took her away from her beloved home and sent her to a nursing home where she died. But then some strange things started to happen in the house. When people started to move into the house, originally the realtor who was guiding people through on the tour of the house, he went down into the basement. It was pitch dark. So he lit a match. And even though there was no wind in the basement, the match blew out. And so he lit another match, and he was startled by the appearance of a woman down in the darkness of the basement. Now, there are other stories as well, such as some of the new homeowners would come downstairs to see an elderly woman in their living room asking why they were in her house. You know, what are they doing in her house? And so this elderly woman's ghost has been seen in the house for many years. So another famous place here in Rockford, this is probably, I would say, one of the most haunted locations in Rockford. This is Rockford College. Its original campus was along the Rock River, but then it was moved, I believe, in 1892. No, in 1964. That's quite a gap in years. It was moved in 1964. What you see here is Adams Arch. This is the only remaining piece of the original campus. They decided to keep it as a memorial, and it was one of the doorways to Adams Hall. Now, this particular memorial has some stories associated with it. Some people think that when they're in the area, they can hear the laughter of young ladies that sort of have been carried along with the monument. One of the other sort of more unlikely places on campus to be haunted is the Burpee building, which is a more modern addition. And there was a radio station in the basement that was rumored to have been an old office where a man had committed suicide. And a person was working in the office late one night, and this is according to legend, a breeze came by, and he sort of looked up to see if the window was open, and when he looked back, some papers had been cleared off his desk, revealing an article about the suicide there in the Burpee Center. The Clark Arts Center is another one that, got a little ahead of ourselves there. Clark Arts Center is another one that's supposed to be haunted on campus. A lot of theaters are haunted, as you can see. Coronado is one of them. But there are actually two theaters in the Clark Arts Center. There's the Cheek and Maddox Theater. The Cheek Theater is sort of like a little practice theater in the basement. It's very dark, and its ghost is very dark as well. People say that they can sort of see someone in the shadows watching the students practice. And then in Maddox Theater, that's supposed to be haunted as well by a student who apparently had some kind of illness and died behind the stage, and she would ring a bell for help so that people could come and give her aid. This story doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't know why somebody who was gravely ill would be put behind the stage, but this is something that the students would tell each other about. Now, the Coronado is a very old, beautiful theater. I believe it's it's on the National Registry of Historic Places. And it opened in 1927. Some people have speculated that the theater was built over part of an American Indian burial ground, because in the park next door there are Indian burial mounds. And so there's a theory that the theater itself is sort of cursed by having been built in that area. There's actually a very strange story about the theater that you might hear on the internet about how somebody was investigating the new air conditioning ducts in the theater, and they came across some kind of like strange salamander creature in the basement. And there's a theory that this somehow has to do with water spirits from the Rock River. But the more conventional story about it is that it's haunted by these 3 different ghosts of past owners and employees. Miss Kleen is supposed to make her presence known with lilac perfume. Way to go, Aaron.
I didn't even touch this.
Twin Sisters Woods is a really interesting one. Anyone who went to East High School here probably is aware of the reputation of the park. A lot of people go there around winter time to go sledding on the hills, but it also sort of has a more sinister reputation. And a lot of the stories sort of center around the creek that sort of runs through the park. It's called Keith Creek. And there's a couple of old trees here. There's a big giant willow tree that has graffiti spray painted all over it. And one of the trees deep inside the woods was supposedly a hanging tree where people were hung. And the ghost is a ghost of a young child who supposedly drowned in the creek. Of course, that there's stories about satanic rituals and things that take place in the woods, disembodied voices, mysterious figures. East High School is sort of across the street from Twin Sisters Woods. This has a very conventional story, not very detailed. Basically, the auditorium is supposed to be haunted by a former employee named Addie or Hattie. No one is really sure if this was a janitor or one of the teachers or not. And she's heard singing in the empty theater. This one is sort of unconventional. You don't hear a lot about malls being haunted. Now, when I've done this presentation before, I've actually read the news article about this really bizarre event that happened here in 2001. I don't have it with me right now because we don't have much time, but basically a man was throwing flaming bags down onto the crowded shoppers. I don't think anybody was injured, but I believe he set himself on fire. It's an incredible story. It was a target of a terrorist threat in 2006, and a lot of people say that that after hours they'll clean up the store at night and they'll put everything away, you know. But then when they come in the next morning, things will be messed up again. I heard another story about an employee who went to use the bathroom and it felt like they were trapped in there and they couldn't get out, and so they pounded on the door And finally, the door gave way, but nobody was out there. They thought maybe somebody had been playing a trick on them. Now we're sort of, we're going to get outside of the Rockford area. This is a story from Belvedere. And I love the Civil War, so I always love a good Civil War story. And basically, this is a kind of a romantic tale about a young woman who fell in love with, some people say, a Confederate cavalryman. I'm not sure how that makes sense, given that we're so far north. But we'll go with that. So she fell in love with a dashing young Confederate officer, and he went off to fight in the war, and he promised to marry her upon his return. So he gave her a very beautiful engagement ring. She had the wedding dress all picked out. Unfortunately, he never returned. And this woman was just so heartbroken that she never married anyone else. She lived in the house alone with her and I believe a servant. Tragically, the legend is that that Nelly was so stricken with grief in her old age that she donned her wedding dress and walked into the river and drowned. Some people say that when her body was found, it was like covered with snakes. But in reality, she was just very elderly. She suffered from partial blindness. And so officially they said that she walked in the river on accident, just sort of wandered in there and drowned. There's even a poem that's been written about it. Nelly Dunton, quiet and polite, drowned in the river late one night. Pray you may, now pray take flight, lest Nelly claim your soul tonight. And the legend that is associated with this that kids like to tell each other is that if they ever see the ghost of Nelly dressed in her wedding gown, that she'll try to embrace them and sort of drag them to a watery grave. This is a great story because it speaks to the sort of very early pioneer history of the area. This area was occupied by Potawatomi early on when the white settlers began to arrive. And Big Thunder was one of the chiefs at the time. And basically when he died, his body was buried and given reverence like a lot of the chiefs at the time. Here's a picture of how Potawatomi Indians would have dressed. And so his body was put up on an elevated platform, and they covered it with a structure with white bark on the outside. So it was said to sort of gleam on the top of the hill when people weren't around. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the European immigrants who came through the area, they would stop at the grave to take a souvenir. And the first thing that was stolen was Big Thunder's skull. But little by little, they took pieces of his skeleton. And even some of the local settlers would throw in pig bones and stuff to sort of trick souvenir hunters who would come through. And today the Boone County Courthouse sits there where the grave used to be.